Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our peer call, our nutrition peer call for the month of May. Today we have a special guest. We have Michelle Madeley from the American Planning Association, and she is going to talk about 3 different projects that she's worked on. And we are very excited to have her on this peer call. And as always, we'll have her present for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open the line for you all to ask questions, or you can always chat your questions in the box. So before we begin, I'd like to introduce Michelle. She's a research associate with APA's Planning and Community Health Center. Prior to joining APA, she worked with Community Food Lab as a food systems designer in Raleigh, North Carolina, after earning her dual master's degrees from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in public health and city and regional planning. As a graduate student, she worked on several multidisciplinary research projects involving renewable energy, transportation disadvantaged populations, parks, public health, and wetland compensatory mitigation programs. Michelle previously worked at the political department of the League of Conservation Voters, an environmental advocacy organization in D.C. for 3 years, and she spent time working on small, diversified vegetable farms in Washington and Texas. She has an undergraduate degree in public policy from Duke University, and now I'd like to present Michelle.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, I'm glad to be on this call and chat with all of you working on Plan4Health and specifically on nutrition projects. So I'm just going to share a little bit about a couple of different projects I worked on with Community Food Lab in my prior role. So Community Food Lab is a small food systems design and consulting firm based in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it's sort of a new startup that works with municipalities, institutions, nonprofits, individuals, collaborations on, as a consultant, as a contractor, we collaborate on grants and serve as sort of a food system specialist. So that's just sort of the background about the organization, and there's links on the slide if you want to check out the website and learn a little bit more. I left the organization to come to APA and do research here, but you can learn more about their current projects and what else is going on. So I'll just talk a little bit about, I sort of chose these 3 projects because I think they show the diversity of the types of food systems work that can be done. And the first one is sort of a regional food systems strategy. The second one is working really at a small scale in a neighborhood. And then the third is about our food policy council work in North Carolina, which is really robust. So one project we were working on in collaboration with many other organizations was the Farms for Food project, and that was in collaboration with Conservation Trust for North Carolina, a land trust that has typically worked on other land conservation issues, but agricultural preservation is gaining sort of importance and significance, especially in the Triangle region of North Carolina, which is developing very rapidly, and the development pressure on existing farms is creating sort of lack of access to farmland for new farmers and creating some barriers to increasing local food production, which is sort of interesting because as the population grows, there's even more demand for local food, especially in the Triangle region, which is sort of known for having great farms and having great farm-to-table restaurants and having great farmers markets and has a really rich history with local foods. And so in collaboration with some land trusts and the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, which is an advocacy and policy organization dedicated to small farmers, the Triangle Farms for Food project included the 5-county region, and the objectives were to prioritize farmland protection in the region and also to propose some other innovative conservation and agricultural economic development strategies to maintain and sort of promote local farms and local food in the area. And this is an infographic that some of our partners pulled together to raise awareness about the local food scene and what that entails, both with the acreage of farmland lost and how much revenue is generated through local farms. And as part of that project, it was really a planning project, and hopefully around this time that'll start moving into implementation. But as part of the project, we worked starting with sort of a GIS model that included a lot of attributes, layers to find out which areas we should really prioritize. And this is just a snapshot. I won't go into a lot of detail, but looking at elements like agricultural soils, present use valuation, proximity to urban areas, we could find some hot spots of areas that should really be prioritized for farmland conservation. But, you know, a map can't tell the whole story, so we ground truth these models or these maps with resource professionals in each county. So that included people from the cooperative extension agencies, soil and water conservation districts, the planning department, came together in each county and kind of discussed what these maps were reflecting and whether that matched the reality of their experience working with farmers in the region, working with communities and working with developers, what areas were, you know, kind of going to be developed. And that sort of helped us frame these maps into having an urban fringe model and a rural conservation model, because the areas in white are actually the cities, the urban areas. So as you can see, like, that is taking up more and more space in that region. So preserving large tracts of land close to the cities probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but prioritizing small areas closer to the city might be a good strategy. So when we were working with resource professionals, we were also reviewing farmland protection plans, which North Carolina Department of Agriculture funded starting around, I think, 2010 or 2012. So each county developed a plan. So we did a review of those, and kind of, now that they're a few years old, it's unclear whether counties will be able to update those plans, but we're hoping that this sort of regional approach is one way to kind of keep that ball moving. The other thing we did was a really brief economic analysis to try to describe the local food supply, as it were, as it can be represented by acreage of farmland, land and agriculture, and cash receipts, and then thinking about local food demand by showing how the trajectory of the population growth, pounds of food consumed, and how much money is spent on food generally. So this is not a robust economic analysis, but it was a starting point for us to kind of be able to describe the value of local food and the mismatch between the supply and demand. And right around the time I moved to DC to work with APA, we were designing some community engagement sessions, some sort of visioning interactive sessions in, I think we were going to do 2 to 3 meetings in these counties to get feedback from other residents and farmers, because we had already met with the resource professionals, but we wanted to hear from some more folks before putting together the plan and kind of synthesizing all that information. So that's sort of taking a regional approach, a collaborative approach, but I did want to talk quickly about another unique project that Community Food Lab was engaged with. Passage Home is a community development corporation that works to break the cycle of poverty for communities in Wake County. And so they're focused on connecting families and neighborhoods to resources and opportunities. And one of their spaces is in the South Park neighborhood in southeast Raleigh, which is a very low-income area. Residents face a lot of challenges. It's also very close to downtown Raleigh, which is growing very quickly. As I was kind of mentioning in that last project, the development pressure is really high, so some of those community members are at risk for displacement as well. So Community Food Lab worked with Passage Home on developing kind of a way to engage with community development through food. And so Passage Home has a commercial kitchen in their facility, and we were helping them leverage that to be able to connect with community members through offering nutrition classes, while also we were developing a grant proposal to offer a culinary jobs training program to really target community members who might be able to connect, you know, their financial future with food in a really important way. They also had a couple of spaces for urban agriculture, And so these are a couple of images of Lester, who's a resident community gardener, and he was engaged with education classes and also some sort of interesting partnerships with a local restaurant called Happy and Hale that makes really great salads, sourcing all locally and, charging pretty high prices for it. But there's, a great market there, a willing market to pay for that. So he was growing kale for Happy and Hale and kind of had an outlet to actually earn revenue through that urban agriculture. So those are just a couple of images, and could talk more about that if people have questions. But I'll just wrap up by talking about one other thing that I was engaged with in North Carolina, which was not directly through Community Food Lab, but there was really a movement for county food policy councils in North Carolina, and that was supported by a few different institutions at the state level and a state level food policy council. But I was engaged with the Durham Farm and Food Network, and which is a grassroots county-wide collaborative group of diverse, committed, and engaged residents and organizations. A little bit of feedback, so I hope that you all are hearing me okay. But we actually spent almost 2 years as a task force before officially launching in January of this year. And so we met monthly as a task force, and it was all volunteer run. And we did have a facilitator who kind of helped us keep progress going. And we ended up with a governance structure that included a coordinating council and 4 action circles related to farming and food. And those action circles are health, economy, farming and natural resources, and food justice. And then, so people can be engaged at different levels. There's also sort of the Durham Farm and Food Network listserv, so people can stay up to date on events and other happenings if they don't have the time to commit to being in the coordinating council or the action circles. So we kicked off with a public forum just this January and had over, I think, 150 attendees. So it was really well attended, and we had some great discussions. And hoping to move that into some action this year. And there are definitely challenges with engaging community members who are not already working on food systems issues, but that was something that we definitely talked about and were open about, and wanted to use events like the public forum to bring new people in. The other sort of supporting feature is that there is that statewide food policy network, and there are food policy councils in all the neighboring counties. So that's something that I think can really actually support individual county food policy councils, with having support from your neighbors. So those are just a few projects that I was working on, and I hope that sparked something for things that y'all are all working on. So if people have questions or comments, I would love to hear from you guys.
Thank you, Michelle, for providing that great overview of those 3 projects. I'd like to open the line now. If we have any questions, please feel free to ask Michelle, or as always, you can chat something in the box as well, any questions or comments. I was interested, Michelle. I really liked when you described the activities that were taking place in the community in terms of the nutrition classes that were being offered and the grant that was being written for the culinary job training, and all of those numerous ways to engage the community members and really get them involved. And I was just wondering if you can speak a little bit about the nutrition classes and the urban agriculture. How did the project, how were you able to recruit community members and engage them and really make them a part of the effort and take advantage of these great resources and activities happening right there?
That's a really great question. Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people, there's no magic bullet, as it were, to kind of achieving that. One really great asset was Ann Marshall served as sort of the kitchen manager as well as an outreach, I guess I'm sort of blanking on the title, but she was an outreach specialist as well for Passage Home, which is the Community Development Corporation. So she had a lot of ties to the community and had clients that she could work with and kind of suggest on an individual basis that if they were interested in this free class, it was a great resource. They also focused on when to schedule those classes, when would work for people that they were trying to reach out to. So they had a mixture of classes on Fridays as well as some options on Saturdays, and that I think provided a couple of different options. And in terms of urban agriculture, Lester, who is their gardener, he lived in the community, so I think that makes a big difference in terms of having some community connections. And then in terms of getting, so he was working with youth in their sort of children's programs, so they had an after-school program hosted by a Passage Home. So they sort of had a captive audience for a lot of these programs, and that was one way of recruiting participants. They were also really engaged with other nonprofits working on both community development and food security. So there are so many awesome organizations in the Raleigh area, like the Interfaith Food Shuttle has some urban agriculture programs, and they would collaborate and sort of cross-share. So that was a really helpful way to recruit participants.
Thank you for sharing that, Michelle. Let's see, it seems that we do have a question, and we'd like to know if you can speak a little bit about any cross-cultural work that was done as part of these 3 different projects.
Yeah, that's a really great question, especially when you're talking about food systems. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, cross-cultural being engaging with communities who might not already be working on food systems issues, or communities that are not like more diverse communities. That's something that really came up a lot working with Passage Home, as I was just kind of describing that, these are low-income folks. These are folks that have often been overlooked, especially in food systems discussions. And I think that really links with the work of the Food Policy Council. And in that collaboration and sort of some others that we were a part of, it's hard to get folks at the table, at sort of the planning table, but when you have the projects being implemented, like the community garden projects, that's the time to really bring people in. It's difficult when we were engaged with a lot of meetings, a lot of community meetings, to kind of make the case that, there was progress being made in those meetings, and we wanted to hear their voice. We wanted to hear everyone's voices. So we had food at all meetings, and we really made a point to have a meal at some of our community meetings. And I think that, really relied on getting some donations, getting volunteers to bring food, because that is a big ask, and not all grants can support that kind of having food at meetings. But especially when you're working on food systems, I think really valuing like breaking bread together and sitting down and talking over a meal rather than just eating while working. That was something that we really focused on. And at the Durham Farm and Food Network kickoff event, we did have Spanish language interpreters there, so that we could have, when we broke into small groups, we could have a small group that was speaking in Spanish. We didn't have a lot of folks there that were taking advantage of that. So again, it's about like actually having targeted recruitment and having people who can bring folks in, and not just having someone who's not connected to the community invite you to an event. But I'm still learning. I'm curious about what other folks are doing, and I think we're all experts because we're all learning together.
Thank you, Michelle. I noticed that, and I was also very glad to see on the bottom of one of the slides that for that kickoff meeting, you also were able to provide childcare, because I know that's very important for some members that really do want to participate in different events, and they may, have to choose. And so that's a way to also bring people in. One other thing, could you possibly talk a little bit more about how you introduced the concept of food systems to a community, and what is the type of language that you would use?
That's a really good question. I would probably advise on not using the term food systems, because it doesn't really have a lot of meaning behind it, and we all interpret it really differently. So I think as much as possible being specific about what exactly you're going over. And sometimes when you're talking about food system and you're talking about that cycle from production to prepping and adding value to foods or moving the food from farm to a restaurant. And then if you're talking about sales, call it that. And I think to the extent possible, like avoiding jargon, just like in any other field, that's really key. But food system, that encompasses so much. And when we talk about healthy food systems, we talk about financially viable food systems, resilient food systems. I think what we really mean is so many things, including the affordability of food, having farmers get a fair price for what they're selling. So we could really be talking about quite different things. And that definitely came up with the Durham Farm and Food Network, which was really trying to cover it all. And that was partly why we had some subcommittees or action circles related to specific elements of the food system, which include public health, the economy, the farming and the natural resources, and then food justice and food security, which even those, as I'm saying them, I think those can be kind of jargony as well. And especially when talking about food security, I think, sensitivity towards who you're communicating with is really important. And, coming from an asset approach is really beneficial. Does anyone have anything that they want to share about their experience, and what language and sort of terms that they communicate in when talking about food systems? And I'm not sure if anyone on the call is, engaged with trying to develop new coalitions or new cross-sector partnerships, sort of like the Durham Farm and Food Network, which is a food policy council. But if anyone has questions about sort of that piece, like engaging with new partners, then, I'd be happy to talk more about that. I'm not sure what is of most interest to you all. Is it the planning side of things, the public health side, farming?
And I think someone's typing something in, so one moment. Do you happen to have any survey recommendations if anyone is thinking about implementing those and assessing what's more important in their communities? And how did you actually gather the data for the mapping?
Okay. Well, I guess the mapping, that was sort of a really big project looking at some GIS data sets like national NASS, I'm kind of blanking on what that stands for, National Agricultural Survey, but there's some large data sets that we used in addition to some more local data sets, which came from like the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, which knows about farms that are smaller than 5 acres, which are generally not captured in those large data sets. And we also used some other census data and data about voluntary agricultural districts, soil data, a lot of different data sources to go into the GIS map. And then, we did in more informal kind of community engagement or stakeholder interviews. And I guess we did do an assessment with the Food Policy Council, and that was conducted by a graduate student intern. And again, for those sort of action circle areas, we kind of identified all the different types of data that you might have. So some of it's publicly available, some of it is, how many SNAP recipients or WIC recipients are in the community. So a lot of that came from different agencies and service providers, in addition to what you might find just on an internet search. And that sort of connects with a couple other projects that we were working on that had to do with food security, and we were trying to merge a lot of data about food pantry locations, their hours. We were trying to get a really robust, comprehensive look at where all the resources and assets are. And there's a lot of information out there, and a lot of it's duplicative, but almost none of it is complete. And so that can be a really big task, is just doing the assessment of where the assets and challenges are. And especially in this food systems work, even just focusing in on food security, there is sort of this distribution channel that is not present when you look at numbers on their own. So sort of thinking about the relationship between donors or wholesale providers that are providing food to food pantries or to food banks, but then go to food pantries and then get to recipients. There's a lot in that chain that is hard to capture with, total pounds of food distributed. It doesn't really tell the complete story. So there's a lot of room for innovation, I think, in collecting information and gathering that. And a lot of it is going to be qualitative, I think. And certainly surveying community members themselves. Sometimes, there are existing surveys that have gone out from organizations that would be a good starting point. And having a sense of, who you want to talk to and what information they can provide would be important when surveying community members.
Thank you, Michelle. It sounds like there are a lot of resources out there, a lot of information in numerous ways that people can just find and use it across different projects, it seems, which is great. So, you're working in your Plan4Health coalition, and perhaps it can be used in future work as well once you gather up all the data and decide what it's best used for.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any last thoughts about food systems, data, or anything else? Any recommendations that you can share with our coalitions, Michelle? Or any lessons learned from any of the projects?
There are so many lessons that I think it would be hard to capture them all. I would say, it is work that takes a lot of time and effort. So usually getting results fast is not what happens in food systems. You've got to plant the seed and, have nutrients in the soil, just to make a metaphor. There's a lot of things that have to happen before you can kind of see the results and taste the fruits of your labor. I really enjoy food puns, if you can't tell. But I think you guys are probably doing really great work, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'll type my email address in the chat box, so you can contact me. I would love to talk about food systems more in depth with any of you, so if people have specific questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much for your time today, Michelle. And I hope that people do reach out with any particular questions. And as always, if you have other questions after this call, you can also use the listserv to connect with other peers. Don't forget to check out the Plan4Health website, the Peer Learning Network, and continue to share information with one another. So until our next call, thank you, and we hope you'll join us in June. Have a great afternoon.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.